Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming. My name is Lillian and I'm a Food Literacy Project Fellow here with the undergrad Harvard University Dining Services, and so it's been a really nice time to be involved with this conference, and thank you so much for coming today. Welcome to this panel today. We're talking about land transition and succession, and today we've been kind enough to be joined by Mary, Severin, and Frank, and Severin will be moderating today, so please give them a warm round of applause to welcome them.
I'll just start. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming along. So what do widowed landowners in Iowa have to do with vagabond squatters in the Forest of Dean? Our two panelists are coming from two very different perspectives, working both of them within a cultural milieu in the issue of land rights, land transition, and land access. Land actors in all of the different places are confronting tremendous obstacles for survival, viability, and navigating family politics. Navigating their particular obstacles, the inevitable slalom, can be made easier by a shared meta-narrative, by an atmosphere or cultural understanding of the issues at stake. Many of the panels you watch today are people working on a transactional basis with legal tools, transactional tools, and administering land transition with a growing fleet of professionals who are working to convene positive outcomes for the land. We need more of these agents of transition, and we need urgently to recruit and train them well. I see many potential recruits in this room. But with our panel here, we point to another fora for critical activism, and that is in confronting the land question culturally. It is this cultural work and our work in the moral economy in which these land transactions, land leases, land purchases take place that we're confronting. Getting at the question of how we understand land, how we value it, our relations with the land means engaging with the history, the character, the interpretation, and the cultural story that these farming communities, farming families, and inflections within these communities. This work reaches backwards into history and forwards into an ongoing set of transitions, inflections, and generations confronting climate flux and other factors. This work happens at the grassroots level, in the media, in churches and faith communities, through alignment with adjacent movements and cross-sectoral solidarity, and through movement building. So I'm convener of this. I'm going fast because I'm trying to keep short so you can hear from these guys. I'm convening this panel as a representative from Agrarian Trust, a now 3-year-old organization charged with shifting the terms for land access and land succession in the USA. Just briefly, our mission is threefold. It's number one, to build public awareness of this impending transition of 70% of our farmland in the next 20 years. Number two is to support the stakeholders at both ends of that problem, entering and exiting, and all of those who are fed on the land. That all of those who are fed on the land might benefit from better food sovereignty. And third, to create a farmland commons, which is a new legal instrument to hold land through community ownership for food sovereign communities, leasing land on a lifetime basis to farmers. So for us, this social and movement building context, for us as Agrarian Trust, this social and movement building context is highly strategic. And I'll ask our allies and partners at the end to self-identify those who are within the Agrarian Trust and Greenhorns networks. This work is exciting and ongoing, but I'm going to move straight into the panel. So we're going to ask Mary to go first, introducing herself, her work, to situate that work and talk about the outcomes.
Okay, great. Thanks. My name is Mary Swander. I am a writer, a poet, the Poet Laureate of Iowa, a playwright, a nonfiction writer, and what am I doing at a farm conference like this? Well, a couple years ago, I actually have written several agricultural plays, and a couple of years ago, the Practical Farmers of Iowa came to me and said, "We want you to write a play about farmland succession." And to a normal writer, that would sound like the deadliest, dullest assignment in the world. But to me, who had been through 4 generations in my family of farmland succession problems, I took up the challenge readily. So, farmland succession, why is it a problem? Why was the Practical Farmers of Iowa coming to me? In the next 10 years, over 2 million acres of land are going to change hands in the United States alone. And something like 65% of all farmers currently are over the age of 58 years old. And most of them don't have a will, okay? Or have even started their estate planning whatsoever. So what Practical Farmers of Iowa was seeing, they were seeing their farmers basically lose their land. And they were losing their land to urban sprawl. They were losing their land to corporations sucking it up because the family didn't get it together, in time. They were seeing it lost to pay nursing home costs and many, many, many other things, or the family just imploding and fighting and giving up, and the land got dispersed this way or that way. So I spent a year researching, talking to farmers, researching farmland succession, and came up with a play called Map of My Kingdom. And it has been very successful. In the last year and a half, we've had now about 50 performances, from farmers' barns to the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. And so we're drawing the audiences that we need to draw, and we're going to the farmers, and they're coming in and saying things like, "Oh, wow, I saw this advertised as a meeting about farmland succession. I thought I was going to get a brochure from an extension agent. And instead, I was totally, thoroughly entertained and enlightened about this issue, and I want to bring my whole family back to see this show before we sit down and have our discussion about farmland succession." So it's opening the door for families to talk about this issue. And I'll open the door of the play just to give you an excerpt from it. Now, so it's a one-woman show. The one character is named Angela Martin, and she is a land mediator. So she helps families through this transition. Comes on the stage. Do you know how my grandmother Millie sold her farm? I just heard this story a few months ago. I remember getting this out of the blue news from Mom that Grandma sold the farm. But I never heard how she went about doing it until a while back. And it was only recently that I began to understand why my grandmother sold the farm exactly like she did. Carl Huber told me the story. One Saturday morning, when Grandma Millie was about 80 years old, she knocked on his door. His farm was the one next to ours, and she pulled into his driveway in her 41 Ford. And, "Carl," she said, "I'm selling my farm, and you're the buyer." She laid out the terms, on contract, such and such per acre, till top dollar. And Carl, he's standing there not knowing what hit him. And she's just, Hurricane Millie. And, "Carl, your father and my father immigrated and homesteaded this land. They farmed side by side for years, and you and I have worked together as neighbors all of our lives. We've seen a lot of harvests, a lot of threshing crews." And Carl's nodding, but can't get a word in edgewise. "The Hubers have always been good farmers, and I know you'll take good care of the land. And then your sons will do the same after you." And Carl said he told her the price was a little steep, fair, but a little steep. And he told her he didn't really need another farm. And the boys were already set up. But Millie said, "I've already had my lawyer draw up the papers. And they're all ready. We'll sign them Monday morning with that price. Carl shook her hand, and Grandma Millie told him to meet him Monday morning to sign the papers. And Carl did. That's what Carl told me, that story a while back. Until then, I hadn't really known the details. My mom had simply received a letter one day. Oh, she said, Grandma sold the farm. My mom was stunned. We all were. No discussion, just a letter, and it was sold. It was gone. My mother had grown up on that farm. I had spent summer vacations there. We were in the city then, but the farm, that was steady, you know, always home, no matter where we were, always there. And then it wasn't. I'm going to skip a few pages. A while back, when I saw my family's farm in Ireland, all this clicked for me. I looked out over the land with my cousin, and she told me this story. The ancestral farm was 80 acres, but pure rock. Only 20 acres were actually tillable. And that soil, that 20 acres of arable turf, they cut that up for fuel and literally burnt through all their farmland. So the farmers went down to the ocean, hauled up these large baskets of seaweed and kelp from the beach, laid it across the rocks and the barren scars. After years and years of composting what they'd been pulling out of the ocean, the soil became tillable. And when my ancestors came here, they actually had great soil, but they burnt through it just the same. And when the Dust Bowl came, well, there wasn't a lot of seaweed here. Okay, so an excerpt of Map of My Kingdom. We got a little bit of background there about the land use in Iowa where this play is coming out of, and of course, it's a story of the dispossessed possessing. Okay? So, of course, it was native land to begin with, and then the Homestead Act of 1862 opened up that land for settlement, and who was coming to settle it were people that were dispossessed in Europe. The settlement in Iowa was 1/3 Scandinavian, 1/3 German, and 1/3 Irish. So the Irish, from my mother's background, homesteaded there, came out of the potato famine, dispossessed there. The other Northern European countries were either overpopulated or at war, or draft dodgers evading the wars, things like that. Then that also coincided with the Civil War and the Franco-Persian War a little bit later. So those original settlers came in the Civil War. Actually, a lot of settlers came up from the south. We had whole African-American towns in Iowa, believe it or not. And you wouldn't see that today from the tradition that we have. But it was actually much, much more diverse in 1870 than it is in 2016. But it's now heading back a little bit. And then we hit two critical times of possession in the 1930s, the Depression, and then in the farm crisis of the 1980s, where there was just a major consolidation, major shift. Just to give you an example, in the 1990s, when Jane Smiley wrote 1,000 acres, that was considered a huge farm. That was a big industrial farm. Now that is a very small farm. Okay. The average size is probably 3,000, and we've got a lot of 10,000 acre farms in Iowa. You go to the Dakotas, and that's a small farm. Okay. I gave some of this background about the play. We've had performance after performance after performance, but the most interesting thing to me is the convergence of the people, the kinds of organizations that have been interested in the play and in, a piece of artwork to address a major agricultural issue. So, for the first time in my life as a writer, I've had bankers, lawyers calling me up, "Hey, Mary, what can we do for you?" Well, what do you know? So, bankers end up, of course, right in the middle of this situation. Lawyers are right in the middle of it, of course, accountants, but religious groups have become involved in farming organizations and extension. Now, one of the things that's really interesting to me addressing this issue is there's a huge gender issue involved. And with that goes the question of emotion attached to the land. Okay? So 50% of the farmland in Iowa is owned by women. In my family alone, for 4 generations, women have ended up with the farm. Men die earlier, women are better managers, women have more interest in hanging on to it, and we performed the play for various law associations, and always this question comes up from the audience, and that is, we handle all this estate planning, but a farm is just like any other asset. It's just like a stock or bond. It's an investment. So why does everybody get so emotional about this? Right? What they're talking about is the women that end up with the farm. And I say, okay, do you raise a family on a stock or bond? Do you grow food on a stock or bond? Do you plant trees on a stock or bond? Do you constantly nurture a stock and bond in different ways and try to improve the soil and so you're living? Okay. Do you have memories that are attached to a stock and bond about your children, about the different generations who have been in it? So this is an asset that's very emotional and very tied to women's issues. So in the play, I made the land mediator a woman, and I made her really smart. She's got a PhD in psychology, and then she's got a law degree too. So we've been. Here's some shots of touring the play around, from standard beautiful theater spaces to the opera houses. That's a great old opera house that's been refurbished, to farmers' barns. I love it. Farmers call me up on the phone and they go, "Mary, I got a state-of-the-art theater in my barn." I'm like, "Really? Why?" "Well, there's not much to do in there once." And I go there and it's just beautiful. I said, "But I need something, to happen in that barn." So we're making it happen for them. And then, this is a real important part of the production. We have a post-performance discussion where this conversation opens and people can begin to talk about this. And the most amazing thing is farmers will get out and go, "Hey, here's what we did." And other one will go, "Oh, that's a really interesting way to approach that. Oh, okay, here's what we did." And so forth. So they exchange information. And they're finding that there are many, 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 many more options than there used to be. The biggest advice that all these bankers and accountants and everybody else gives at the performances is, don't just do what dad or mom did, because laws change, your taxes are going to change, farming changes, and families change. So we're finding this question is, the big question that farmers have is, well, how am I going to be fair to my kids? Okay, if I'm going to give the property to my kids. But depending on the audience, there are other questions that come up. And we did this show for a Catholic Worker Farm organization, and I opened up the questions to the audience, and the very first response was, well, we took this land away from the natives, so why don't we just give it back? And everybody went, yeah, we should do. And it turns out there is a land trust to do that very thing. So there are many, many more options out there than there were even 10 years ago. As you've heard in this conference, there are land trust options, Native American associations. I've worked with organizations like Practical Farmers of Iowa. They actually are a type of land trust now where farmers are giving their land to an organization like that. There's an organization really important called Women, Food, and Agriculture Network. I don't think they have their website up there. But they help women, particularly who are in this situation. There are so many women that end up with land who don't expect it or don't know what to do with it. I have worked with people from like a woman who is 92 years old and had to bring the harvest in last year with her grandson, to a woman at age 57 who inherited the farm, never grew up on the farm, didn't know what to do with it, but she knew she wanted to farm in a more ecological way. And so Women, Food, and Agriculture helps people like that, particularly women, to educate them, to give them support. They mentor young farmers, beginning farmers. There are programs through the Land Stewardship Project in Minnesota to do that. There are actually I've got some really good help out of extension agents who are very knowledgeable in the field, and now they're starting to sponsor the show. And we've made a DVD of Map of My Kingdom. It'll be out in a couple weeks, so I gave you a handout there if you would like to get a copy of that. And lawyers want to use it with their clients. Farm families want to use it with their families. Extension agents want to use it. Universities and colleges want to do it, and there'll be other uses for that too. Okay, there's more information about Map of My Kingdom, my other shows on my website there. We've got a Facebook page that's really, really active, so check that out. And what do I have here? Oh, and then this is a project that's launched. I'll talk about this a little bit later about Ag Arts that is launched from Map of My Kingdom. Okay?
Good introduction. Thank you. So let's open up Frank's slides. Again, Frank's going to talk a little bit where this cultural work is situated, what the work is, and what some of the outcomes have been.
Hi guys. Hello. Thanks to Greenhorns for getting me here. I want to do a call out, a big up to all my friends back in the UK who are homeless and living in the woods now. And you'll find out why in a minute. And also I'd like to big up Occupy the Farm. If you guys haven't seen that film, you should. They were going to be here, but they, for some twist of fate, aren't here. But it's a good story, so check that out. Okay, so what I'm going to try and talk about today is social change, land-based projects as a vehicle for social change, and using facilitation to deal with the shifts we want to make in land use patterns, land tenure, and new entrant issues. So I'm a biodynamic farmer and grower in the UK. I've been growing for 10 years. And at the moment, I'm acting as an ambassador for biodynamics in Costa Rica, because they don't, in other parts of the world, they don't have training for biodynamic farmers. So I'm having a year out learning how to grow biodynamic bananas. I'm not an academic. So I dropped out of uni and got into farming. I'm not necessarily a well-read person. I'm more of like a practical, go do stuff type. Try things out, make mistakes, and learn in the process. And I wanted to share some of those things that I've learned. So, and it's surprising, some of the things that I wanted to say have been already echoed in the talkers that we had this morning. So, yeah. So, history. Land ownership in the UK is the most unequal in Europe, and particularly Scotland's pretty bad, where like 70% of the UK is owned by 1% of the population, for numerous historical factors. It's not my role today to give you a history lesson, but for numerous reasons, people decided to leave the UK and come to the New World. But they took with them like the memories of brutality that they experienced, and obviously they repeated themselves. So I'm part of a movement, like a long tradition of resistance against oppression. I see myself as part of a movement, and I'm privileged to work with people in the UK who are the previous generation of the land-based activism movement. So there's a group called The Land Is Ours, who, like in the 80s and 90s, were doing squatting land and access to land work. And so I work with those people, and they've created this organization, The Land Is Ours, and also a publication called The Land Magazine, where you can find your copy outside on the table out there. It's very reasonably priced. I recommend picking it up. I had to do that. They'll be happy that I plugged their magazine. And I also work with them in a new group that's formed in the last 3 years called the Land Workers Alliance. The Land Workers Alliance is the La Via Campesina for the UK. And yeah, I've never worked with any group that is so like hardcore, great activists, hard-working farmers. So yeah, La Via Campesina in the UK, we do UK lobbying. We're a union of producers. We lobby in Westminster, but we also do like organising around the UK. We do seed co-op, and we got the farm hack off the Greenhorns. Now, I'm much more interested in community organising, so I was the chair of the Land Workers Alliance last year, and was trying to push for more regional groups. So that's going. I ended up going to different areas of the UK, meeting up with farmers in those areas, and trying to work with them and facilitate the groups towards encouraging them to organise between themselves to strengthen farmer-to-farmer relations. So that's some of the work I've been doing with the Land Workers Alliance. So yeah, along with working with the Land Workers Alliance, I've been working with a group called Reclaim the Fields. So Reclaim the Fields is a network of people and projects who are dedicated towards taking back control of the food system. Now, it's a network that spreads across Europe, and so we organise on non-hierarchical basis. We're real needs orientated, trying to create alternatives now to the broken food system. And we use direct action tactics and community organising, and we're expressly anti-capitalist. So Reclaim the Fields is quite close to my heart. I found that the best thing that struck me about Reclaim the Fields was that it turns the anger and frustration of the anti-capitalist movement into something positive, using land-based projects in urban and rural areas and doing community organising to make a difference. So it's much more grounded and not as angry as you might think anti-capitalist movements are. So my main activities for the last 5 years, working under the banner of Reclaim the Fields, has been organising gatherings. So bringing people together, opening up a space, running it in an as autonomous, self-organised way as possible, and talking about things like land rights, access to land, gender issues, and so on and so forth. And so over the years, the meetings got bigger and bigger. We did them all over the UK. So that then culminated in me and the collective I organised with doing the European Assembly in the UK. So the network that spreads across Europe organises itself through, in the wintertime, running assemblies where the people who've been most interested in organising the network get together and do back-of-house stuff. That's like printing the zines, translation work, the Blah Blah Collective, which is an autonomous translation collective, working out which work groups need help, whether it's worth taking them along, who's going to do the next assembly, who's going to do the gatherings in the summer. And then that culminated for me this last summer doing the biggest UK gathering that we've done, or the biggest gathering that I've been part of organising, which was about 200 people turned up to an anti-fracking occupied site. There was also a squatted field where they're blocking fracking being done that was called Build Gardens Not Prisons, because in that local town there's also a mega prison being built, which you're all familiar with, massive private prisons. So they're now doing a program of building prisons, and the people I work with also work with prison abolition. So it was like this activist mashup of like ecological destruction, anti-oppression, and it was really good, really vibrant, good atmosphere. And so, yeah. So a major part of the ideas inside Reclaim the Fields is access to land. And so a radical perspective on access to land is land being the source of all resources. And so if you control the resources, you can grow your own food, you can drink water, you can build your house, you can then be
Free.
Autonomous, and live in a more free way. So, so through doing organising these gatherings and networking, I met people who wanted to do direct action towards achieving food autonomy and access to land stuff. So, for the last 5 years, I've also been a land squatter and community organiser in the Forest of Dean. Now, the Forest of Dean is in the southwest, Gloucestershire, border of Wales. It's been contested for a long time. It's a hilly forest. It's protected by this covenant to do with royal forests, so it's still maintained a large forested area. And it's still got common law rights existing there. So because of this weird historical bubble that's been inside, it's also geographically isolated by two rivers, is hilly. The people there still maintain their common law rights, so they do commoning sheep, they do free miners, so they mine ore from under the ground and have common rights to those. So they have a healthy mistrust of the state and resist oppression of the state because they're wealthy in resources, although so they've got the trees there and they've got the coal and the iron ore underground. So they've been holding their own for a while and they've got a strong cultural identity. So land and a lot of the towns there started off as squats. So they have historical, cultural memory of their ancestors coming to the forest and squatting, doing mining and making their lives. So there's a cultural fabric that we're hooking into. So we went there and we started off, we squatted somewhere called the Wilderness Centre, which was an education centre, an environmental education centre closed by the cuts. So it was like 2011, 2012.
What's a cut?
Austerity cuts. So like global economic crisis. You guys know about that one. Lots of public services being cut, lots of public assets being sold off. We squatted this big education centre and did a massive public campaign, got lots of paper coverage, did loads of public meetings, like big public meetings, rooms bigger than this with like twice as many people as this, talking about this issue of the Wilderness Centre. So got a lot of attention. And as that one came to an end, we got 3 months there. As that one came to an end, we got told about another piece of land on the other side of the forest. And so the story begins of Yorkley Court Community Farm. So it was 180 acres of unregistered land on the south of the forest, and so we squatted this farm. So we took possession of 180 acres of pasture land. So that was 3.5 years ago, and it's just been evicted 2 weeks ago. Sad face. That's why all my friends are homeless and living in the woods. So we built this project over the years on a strong and clear media message. So through my work with the Landworks Alliance, I got media training with Greenpeace. So I did a lot of the media work, but it was as a vehicle for the community. So all of the press releases were written communally. We run everything on consensus, decision-making. So we were telling the story of the land, which is incredibly complex, which I won't go into the long and boring story, but essentially the land was unregistered. We precipitated a change. It became registered and sold, and therefore it was then owned by somebody. And for the last year that we were there, we were resisting eviction, so we were like barricaded and stuff like that. But we had support from the locals because of our good attitude towards the community. We did stuff. We went out to people and did things for them, for the local school, helped out in the local town. We did public meetings all the time, being open about our intentions, meeting people, talking to them as equals, being very clear about our intentions, which was to turn the land into a community land trust. So it was never for our own personal gain. We didn't want to own it. We wanted to turn it into a public asset. So, yeah. That struck a chord with lots of people, basically. The messages that we put out resonated with people, and so therefore we got support. We got support through the whole of the local community. So like the parish council, which is like the local people who live in the town who get elected, the parish government, and then we got all the way up into support into the district council, which is the council for the whole of the Forest of Dean. So surprisingly enough, although some people thought of themselves as anarchists, and we ran things on non-hierarchical, non-domination principles through our community, we did have interactions with the state. We took out a tribunal case against the people who were trying to register the land. We did injunctions against them. They did injunctions against us. We did these court battles of possession. We did planning applications for permission to build our homes there. But essentially, we were fighting on all sorts of different fronts. And all the photos behind are of Yorkley Court, which is now a smouldering pile of junk. Whereas, yeah, so it's a bit sad, I suppose. But yeah, quite a few of those pictures of vegetables in my home plot vegetable garden. So a little bit of pride there. So, through the work at Yorkley Court, improving my communication skills, doing Reclaim the Fields, doing all the gatherings, learning facilitation, doing the regional coordination work for the Landworkers Alliance, I've developed this idea and a pragmatic approach towards social change, which I'm calling the alchemy of social change. So the successes that I've experienced are building a movement. It's a slow process, but after years of work, things start to happen. I think it's vitally important to improve your social interactions. One of the ideas that I work with is that as humans, we're like a conglomeration of our social interactions. So it's important to try to work on yourself to improve how you interact with people. And essentially, you can't change the world if you can't change yourself. So from doing all these public meetings and workshops, I've realized that it's the process that's important. It's the process of internal transformation and therefore external transformation. And I see facilitators as the leaders of the future. It's a new type of leadership that's non-egoistic, non-hierarchical, a collaborative process that's open-ended and unprejudiced. And it's engagement towards making a change. So that's the idea of the alchemy of social change, where it's an internal process of change with simultaneously with an external process of change. So my experiences of someone who grew up in an urban environment, so I grew up in London, being a farmer or being a veg grower, being an activist, somebody who wants to change stuff, being a squatter, the barriers that I found that I boiled them down to, it's a culture clash. So going into the countryside and trying to tell people to change stuff, they're obviously going to go say, take a leap, okay? So I realized I had to change.
That means take a hike.
Yeah, take a hike, get stuffed, whatever. Yeah.
Get stuffed.
So I had to change my mindset, approach the situation in a different way, and I realized the best way to approach it was to listen and understand, to not tell people stuff or drive my own agenda. Because I found out that when I drove my own agenda and was too focused on the results that I thought were important to make, it essentially blocked progress. So the magic happens when you open up a space without prejudice or projections, with a light touch, facilitate discussions to deepen understanding and acceptance. So you can start conversations about land or food or whatever the issue is that you're approaching. And basically you're helping things develop. And in this emergent process, the results of the discussion are embedded in the people that are participating. And so that's what they take home with them. So they're not just having to listen to some know-it-all tell them stuff. So, yeah, I could pause there.
I think it's good because we have a couple more framing questions.
Sure, let's go for it.
Okay. So what's going to happen now is I'm going to ask one framing question, and you're going to just state in the audience and have a chance also to ask some questions. And then if you run out of questions, I have other questions. Is that facilitating enough?
That's cool.
So, okay, so you have two very different pathways into the cultural work, rural organizing work. around reclaiming land and connection with land and stewardship of land. What are some of the common challenges that we can see in terms of rural organizing, in terms of the hurdles, and in terms of the relationships? And how did your approach, Mary, you through performance and embodying these stories, and you, Frank, through this kind of cultural facilitation, was there some kind of like cultural quantum leap that you experienced? And can you reflect on that?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the biggest challenges is just the geography of the Jeffersonian grid. In the western states, we're laid out on grids and square miles, and so there's one farm, in a very isolated way, and another farm in an isolated way, and the farms are getting further and further apart as they get bigger and bigger, and the small towns that used to be a hub of interaction are dying. And so that's what consolidation has done. That's what the big ag movement has done. Fewer and fewer people on the land, little interaction. When you go back to the European model, people lived in villages and went out on the land. America set it up so each family lived on an individual farm, way spread apart from somebody else. And that structure is still there. So the challenge is, in our individualistic society, especially our rural identity, is getting people to talk to one another. There's your first hurdle. No. And how can you get people to come together? How can you get them to share ideas and spaces and exchange that knowledge? And that's one of the things we found with these plays. They're there. They're coming together over an issue. They get up at the talkbacks and they share that. Well, here, I figured this out, for my family at least. Here's an idea. Oh, okay. Right? And that is dramatic in the rural countryside, because the other structure that's there are the churches. And, people usually have a negative response toward that, but they provide another social structure that you don't really get until you live in that culture, in that society of these people that are spread out and dispersed, and they'll come together at least once a week. Okay.
We're talking about outcomes and relationships.
Yeah, it was. I suppose it's your own personal journey, like trying stuff out and messing up, but still going for it. Like it's a journey of personal transformation coupled with your relationships with what you're doing, like concluding, right, things are messed up, but boiling it down to what's your nucleus, what motivates you, and then working from that. Not always focusing on the shit stuff, but trying to turn that into something positive and doing something about it.
And can I even provoke you more? Like, as an individual, yeah, I hear you, but then I would also say, having gone around and met so many of the land workers and experienced the culture of the encampment and the incredible solidarity that existed for the idea that it represented, that you built something beyond just the barricades and the farm, and that community of people will continue, and that idea will continue, and that idea has real meaning and relevance for the longer struggle, like the long term, because you were talking about that before too.
Yeah, it's like the problems are humongous, like all-encompassing and incredibly intimidating. So yeah, it's a long-term goal, that like a pragmatic approach where you're committed and embedded in a process of transformation, of social change. So you don't just go to the office and then go home and carry on all of the negative social interactions and so on and so forth, trying to live it and breathe it. And yeah, we were, I think one of the results was that we drove a narrative. There isn't really a way to get traction or leverage on access to land. When you're a squatter, you're instantly the other, and you're like not paying taxes, so on and so forth. You're scum. So trying to work in that, against that mentality, and say, well, and start a discussion of like, oh, why? All right, why do you pay taxes? Where do your taxes go? That's an easy one. But then, why is land owned? Like, really? Nobody owning land. Seriously? But it's all owned already. So approaching these massive cultural prejudices and approaching these big things to talk about, yeah, it's, who knows where it's going to go, but something will come out of it. We're part of a movement. We've done something that nobody else has done. We did this massive land squat and got lots of publicity and put the word out there. We put these ideas in people's faces, and they might hate it, they might hate us, but it might resonate with them. And so you can't choose how people are going to understand you or see you, but hopefully those resonances and those effects will go on and something will come out of it. It's not clear what's going to come out of it, but the work goes on. I'm continuing the same trajectory. I'm not going to stop. Like, I might be homeless, I might have experienced burnout and got physically ill from stress and so on, but like, I don't think I want to just give up and go have kids somewhere nice and comfortable.
One of the really positive things that came out of my work was I founded an organization called Ag Arts, and it's to find the intersection of arts and agriculture, and to have, that's the card that I passed out to you. Get on our website, there's a really wonderful introductory video about artists raising the major agricultural issues in our contemporary society and trying to find solutions. And, you know, this started out in Iowa. It's now spread all over the country. You can easily become, we have collectives instead of members, so you're trying to foster community in it, and it, Ag Arts now touches on not only theatrical arts, but visual arts, photography, literary arts, video arts, dance. So there are many, many people involved, and I welcome you to also be involved in it.
And I want to welcome you to ask your own question now.
Yes, for Mary. I run the Animal Law and Policy program here at the law school, but I also manage a farm in Illinois that's remained in my family for 179 years.
Oh, wow.
And then when the grandmother passed away when she was 97, a few years back, I went to tell her attorney the next morning, and his two questions were, you know, does everyone get along? Yeah. Is anybody broke? No. He's like, okay, well, you're in good shape, because those are the two main things that lead to farms being sold usually. And we're very fortunate that, so my mom and her two brothers and their three cousins both spent significant parts of their lives at the farm. But it's easy to see how this happens. When,
Right.
You know, they each make maybe $10,000 a piece from the farm of cash renting it, or they each sell it and make $250,000 a piece, you know, for people who don't have a connection. But one concept that came up that I had trouble articulating then without making it sound self-interested, but it's, I wonder if you could articulate it better, but this idea that you can have this family wealth that's been developed over the course of 6 generations, that it's kind of like this game of musical chairs. Any one generation could just like, oh, nope, we're going to cash out this entire history of family wealth just for our own generation and cohort, and, you know, the heck with everybody else. So I think of my cousin's child who is, you know, struggling to pay back student loans or something like this. Like, it seems like it should go forward at least as far as it went back. But I didn't know if you could articulate.
Oh, yeah, that is a really common problem. Do we hang on to the land for our family legacy, or should we pay back our debts that are pressing upon us really hard now? Or should we just like make a bunch of money and go on vacation? I mean, that's what some people want to do. They just want to cash out and make the money with the hay. And so that's one of the real sources of conflict, is getting the family all on the same page. What is our mission? And one of the things that these farm organizations recommend is that the family sit down. The first thing they try to do is create a mission statement for their farm, which is really hard. You know, if you've got 6, dozen people or whatever it is, trying to define what the farm is about, what kind of legacy you want to see on that property. Also, they have farm families sit down and try to write a legacy letter. What has this land meant to me in the past? What would I like to see it become in the future, to try to find their vision for it? And if Grandpa has written or Grandma has written a letter saying, I would like this farm to have a sustainable future and to be, run in this kind of context, it's much harder for families to go, whoopee, let's just cash out, And so some guidelines, some constraints, some vision has to be brought to the property for it to work out. And also, the family really has to talk about it. The conversation should not take place after the reading of the will. It should take place before that. And so these farmers that are calling me, where's that video, where's that video? They said, I want that video so we can all watch it together and open up the conversation, and I can talk to my kids about what I'd like to see done. So, great question, yeah.
Thanks. Frank, I'm wondering if you can help me resolve a logical conflict that I see in the posture that Reclaim the Woods takes. With respect to, you said the posture they take is expressly anti-capitalist, and I wondered how you resolve that when capitalism in some ways actually enables the organization's existence. To get really tactical, the cars people drive to gatherings, the plane you took to get here, the eyeglasses you're wearing. So how do you respond to that logical conflict?
I'm conflicted in all sorts of other ways. So, it's a progression of ideas. You just have to work in your own self, like justify what you're going to do when you get up in the morning. If I'm worried about buying glasses, then I can't see. So, I take planes. I've taken a couple of planes lately, but I didn't have a car for many years. I grow vegetables, so I see myself as like acting as carbon sequestration. We need money to make the wheels turn. Like organizing gatherings, I had to drive around. It is where the money comes from. And I suppose with anti-capitalist stuff, it's not like we need to destroy the form of exchange. It's the types of domination and the conditions that are attached to those forms of exchange that need to be redressed. So what we did in our community was we tried to demonetize people's lives. So to have a meal there, you didn't have to pay a certain amount. You didn't work per hour per unit of money. If people didn't have money, they could still be part of the community. People who did have money gave more to support the others. At the Reclaim the Fields gatherings, we tried to demonetize people's experience. So we asked for donations, and we made all of the economy there as transparent as possible to engage people in the process of what was happening to them. So they don't just buy a ticket and experience it like a festival. It's like they're there participating and being part of the process. And so there's means and ways that you can demonetize your life and separate yourself from the negative influences of the way the exchange of money and the yielding of capital out of the creation of value by human effort is used against people.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about that because we cannot get like perfection, phrases if you're doing nothing, and it's incremental. you know, we all have conflicts. You know, then we should go around naked and eat nothing but the food we grow. Or I had to fly 7 times in the past 6 months when I'm opposed to it, but for people in my family dying. You know, so was I supposed not to take a plane because I'm an environmental activist? And I just think that it's really dangerous to ask that kind of question, because then it's the best capitalist tool, like to stop anything from happening, and we can tweak things, we can be incremental. I'm certainly less, you know, into like being right all the time at 60 than I was when I was 20. So that's my old lady's answer.
I'll let you go, but then I have another one.
I'm curious, Frank, how you build a really solid sense of community and trust and support among the people that are working on these kind of projects without having a sense of security in terms of, like, we have this land, like all of the people that you were living there with just got evicted after potentially years of living and cultivating that space. And so how do you build community that can withstand that kind of potentially really catastrophic change?
People are drawn together through ideological reasons. The sort of it's a subculture that we live in, and yeah, there was a strange psychological attitude, a type of like Zen meditation of like, I don't know when I'm going to be evicted, but I got to do something, so I'm going to make compost and plant trees because that's what I like to do. Although you don't know if you're ever going to see those trees fruit, but yeah, it's a horrible thing to know that you might be evicted because land security is most important for farming, and then building community and friendships, like building trust over time. And if you've ever been in the situation, in a crisis situation or a pressure, stress situation with other people, it brings you together. So the people now living in the forest, they're together, and that's one thing that comforts them, is their friends are around them and they're looking after each other. So, yeah, it is hard, but I don't know. I suppose quite a lot of the people wouldn't want to do anything else. They're brought together through the determination of the struggle, and putting yourself in that situation sort of dipoles the situation. Like, it does make you an us and them. Like, we had this little bubble for 3 years of all these ideas flying around, and a whole little anarcho subculture. Like, it was quite hippie. It was like the strange love child between the hippie and the anarchos. So we weren't as angry. We were doing like outdoorsy things and having saunas and communing with the land. Also at the same time, like talking about smashing the state. So it was great.
It was hot.
Yeah.
So I feel like one of the things I want to frame in the next little part of this, and we can be interjected, but, you know, how does the cultural approach and the story and the consensus that we build with one another interact with the care of the land? And if the land is ultimately the judge of how our human systems are or are not compatible with its ecological potential or reality, how does changing the story that we tell among ourselves and the understanding that we have among ourselves and the cultural process of getting into better relation with the meaning that we share, how does that get a good outcome in terms of clean water, clean soil, healthy soil, greater diversity, more regional resilience? Like, can we say that these good stories mean something for sustainable agriculture?
Well, yeah, I think stories work by little creeping bits and pieces and concentric circles. I live in the middle of the Amish settlement in Iowa. It's the largest Amish settlement west of the Mississippi River. There are 5,000. I'm surrounded by 5,000 Amish, and then me, who they call English. And and I see these little things happening and stories happening all the time there. Cover crops are a really, really, really great tool. They do everything that we need to do in farming. They eradicate weeds, they provide tillage, they provide fertilizer, just amazing things that we're all doing with all these inputs, for example. So I saw the neighbor down the road, 5-6 years ago, start to convert to cover crops, which is an old technique. And everybody, what are you doing that for? The pushback that comes with any change like that. And then we hit a really, really bad drought year. And his crops were the only ones that survived, because cover crops, retain the moisture in the soil. And so he is creating a little story around his farm and didn't say anything to anybody else. But, he was getting a lot of static. And then all of a sudden, the farmer started looking over the fence and saying, why did you survive the drought? He said, well, and then he started to tell the story about his cover crops. Next year, guess what? Around the periphery of his farm, the next group of farmers started planting cover crops. And it has grown like that in concentric circles. So I think that's where we have to work on a grassroots level. One little story at the center, and then it starts to slowly, gradually provide an example and billow out.
Yeah, I could echo that. It's a narrative and storytelling. We were putting things in front of people that they don't normally hear, and making it reality. Like talking to people about access to land, telling people that we're not squatters, we're eco-farmers. We want to live close to the land, and we don't agree with conventional agriculture. Our planning application had our vision of sustainable living, in it. And so the planning department, they had to read our planning application. And although it was massively stressful, lots of written work, which is really dull, it was a vehicle for activism, putting the story out there, talking about sustainable land use. And I see land-based projects as really fantastic hub for all of the vibrant things in life. Land is the source of everything. If you boil it down, you can talk about any part of society. So land-based projects, whether urban or rural, can be like a vehicle for social change.
And the land itself becomes a storyteller. And the land doesn't lie so well. Anyone else have a thought or a sharing?
Aside from feeling solidarity for your message and trying to be more intentional about demonetizing our day-to-day lives in small ways, incremental ways, is there something meaningful and tangible that we can do to help your community farm recover? Half my family's in the north of England, and Pecking Bridge basically got washed away over the holidays, and there were lots of dries and everything. Is your community okay? Do they need something? Is there something we can do?
That's really kind of you. I don't have a short answer. We have in the past had donate now for Yorkley Court farm eviction, but essentially it's over. I've left the country and I'm doing something else now, but everybody else there is, I don't know how they're getting on. The stories that I hear, they're all right. They've got a support network around them in the immediate area. So, if you know of any vacant lots or bits of land kicking around that need the sort of Robin Hood type to come sort it out.
Mostly boys.
Okay.
We had a good gender balance different times. You just noticed the boys.
Oh. That was my story. Anyone else? Oh,
Yeah, just a quick question for Frank. So you talked about your concepts of land ownership probably being anti the traditional Western concepts of ownership. I'm curious if your organization got to the point of, kind of thinking in the long term about succession and what ownership might mean for the next generation, or never really got to that point.
There are different models for more progressive land ownership, and like we've mentioned, it's like incremental successes. So there's the movement, there's Tinker's Bubble, which was bought by a wealthy benefactor and had covenants on it that there must be a zero carbon thing. Then there's essentially, personally, it is land trusts. And land trust in the UK context is a legal entity that owns the land, that takes it out of the monetary exchange system and holds it in trust forever and puts a covenant on it that has to be used for ecological land use. So for me, getting more bits of land protected in that way is the most progressive attitude that I've come across working with the things that you've got. I mean, in an ideal world, we can't just click our fingers and make that. So you have to work practically and pragmatically with what you've got from whatever ideological position that feels good for you. So I have my own position, but I work with other people that have different positions, but we have shared goals of creating sustainable agriculture. And I don't feel compromised in working with other people that have a different attitude towards me. But yeah, it's land trust, taking land out of the commodity market and putting it safely in the hands of sustainable farmers.
and just to add on to that, the organization that I work for, which is called Agrarian Trust, is working based on a model that was made in France, based on a model that was made in India, based on the teachings of Gandhi. In France, they have 113 farms now that are basically cooperatively owned by a trust. So they're held in public trust for sustainable agriculture, owned by the community of eaters who express their economic solidarity with the project of land growing, of food growing. And so in the co-ops in France, there's a little postcard that says, if you like the food, invest in the land. And that's worked, and they have, whatever, it's almost 60 million euros worth of land now that is owned by that trust. And Agrarian Trust here in the U.S. is now 3 years old, and that's our same exact mission. We created a legal structure that's 501c2 based, so in the community land trust model, holding the land as a community, in a community ownership, putting on very strong restrictions about what kind of farming can happen, to hold that land open for what capitalism is so good at squishing, and what we all want to nourish, which is sustainable farming. So now time is up, and let's all network in the halls. Thank you, everyone.